Good to see everybody. Welcome back to Branches. I'm glad to be with you this morning, and I'm glad to be continuing in this Philippians study. We are almost all the way through the book. We're taking a little bit of a detour, not just this morning. Actually, next week we'll hear from Kim. Awesome. So mark your calendars for Kim Duran sharing her testimony, continuing the week after that. Is it not next week? It's the week after. Pete's correcting me. He's probably the one that's right. At some point, Kim will be up here sharing her testimony, which you'll want to mark your calendars for that. If you're here with us last week, you remember that Pete had you share your resume, and that was our group discussion. It was largely because Paul shared his resume in Philippians and was going through the section in Philippians 3 where you may have in your books or your Bibles, it was titling that No Confidence in the Flesh. Some of your headings say that. And there's a reason for that. You got into your groups. It was actually a lively discussion because it was hard bringing you back together. If there's one thing that we know, everybody loves talking about themselves. And so sharing your resume was an exercise in giving you a chance to talk all about your story, which we love. No shame there. And in that process, learning about how in this letter to the Philippians, Paul is sharing how he is he's a Roman, a Hebrew from the tribe of Benjamin. He's circumcised on the 8th day. He's a zealot. He has all of the Pharisee criteria. He is perfect according to the law. His resume was all on the pro side of the column on pros and cons, at least according to him. It was all in credits, not debits for all of my CPAs out there. And he was sharing how he is now under a new economy. And all of that was in the credit side is now under the debt side. And actually even further, if we had more time last week, we probably would have gone in to share about how if you have a story of what was previously on your resume that is now gone, taken from you. And we shared the story about it's the Super Bowl champion, or it's the CEO, or it's the person that's elevated to the top of their field, and now that's been taken from them. That was Paul's language last week. So it's not just he considers all of that stuff now trash or crap, as Pete said last week. It's not that it's just crap, but it's also that it's gone. He's saying, I have no confidence in that. It's as if it's gone. It's been taken from me. And that's true of Paul. He had a lot taken from him. So, where does that leave us this morning? Well, what I want to do is transition Paul's no confidence in flesh. He was focusing a lot on circumcision on his resume. We won't talk about that again this morning. But he turns his attention from having no confidence in his flesh, in his race, in his tribe, in his religion, in his zeal, in his perfection. He's saying, I'm wiping all that confidence out, and now he puts his sights squarely on his nationality and where he doesn't have his confidence. And I want to read to you, I don't often do this, I switch around translations. In fact, some of you that may be familiar with the various translations we've used, we've been camping in the NIV and the ESV, and I'm going to read from the Message. I feel like Eugene Peterson frames this appropriately. I'm a fan of all of the various translations. They all have their pros and cons. Sometimes it takes a different voice and a different light to break us from the familiarity of something we may have already heard a bunch. And so I want to read it from Eugene Peterson. There's another translation that I've been enjoying through this book. It's N.T. Wright's translation, The New Testament for Everyone, a slightly different voice to be able to read passages that you might be familiar with. That's been a helpful one. But I want to read to you out of the Philippians chapter 3, verse 12 to 21, out of the Message. It says this. I'm not saying that I have this all together, that I have it made, but I'm well on my way, reaching out for Christ who has so wondrously reached out for me. Friends, don't get me wrong. By no means do I count myself an expert in all of this, but I've got my eye on the goal, where God is beckoning us onward to Jesus. I'm off and running, and I'm not turning back. So let's keep focused on that goal. Those of us who want everything God has for us, if any of you have something else in mind, something less than total commitment, God will clear your blurred vision. You'll see it yet. Now that we're on the right track, let's stay on it. Stick with me, friends. Keep track of those you see running this same course, headed for the same goal. There are many out there taking other paths, choosing other goals, and trying to get you to go along with them. I've warned you many times of them. Sadly, I'm having to do it again. All they want is easy street. They hate Christ's cross. But easy street is a dead-end street. Those who live there make their bellies their gods. Belches are their praise. All they can think of is their appetites. But there is far more to life for us. We're citizens of high heaven. We're awaiting the arrival of the Savior, the Master, Jesus Christ, who will transform our earthly bodies into glorious bodies like his own. He'll make us beautiful and whole with the same powerful skill by which he's putting everything as it should be under and around him. Let's pray. Lord, thank you for your word. Thank you for this letter, for this story, for the context of what it was for this early church to express their allegiance to you, Jesus, in ways that were countercultural and subversive, encouraging, inspirational. I pray you expand the borders of our imagination to see you for who you are. Help us to be encouraged with where we're at and give us eyes to see the way that you're working in us and through us and with us. In the name of Jesus. Amen. So, what does it mean when Paul says that we're citizens of heaven? Remember, he just went on the diatribe about it's not about my race. It's not about being from a Hebrew. It's not about being a Benjamite. It's not about being a Pharisee. It's not about being circumcised. It's not about my education. It's not about my perfection. And it's now not about my nationality, of which Paul was a citizen of empire. He was Roman. Paul was basically a U.S. citizen of the ancient Near East. He had the blue passport. He was born of the most powerful nation in the world. He would have been a modern-day U.S. citizen. And now what he's saying is, I place no confidence in that either, in my citizenship. And what does he mean by that? So what I want to do is talk through some of my story and my experience. I've been part of the U.S. church my whole life. My parents were missionaries with Campus Crusade. They served in China, Manila, overseas a ton, bounced around. I went to like 4 or 5 different elementary schools, was all over the place, but that whole time very much entrenched in U.S. evangelicalism. I've been behind the curtain on staff at 4 or 5 different churches. I understand the inner workings, and I've been part of a system that has, from its get-go, been established and perpetuated to kind of advantage me. I am an insider. I am on the inside of an insiders club on an inside nation. That's me. I'm a white, middle-aged, educated man from Southern California. It's kind of my club, historically. I say that like firmly tongue-in-cheek. And the most polarizing issue today still, and I think has been for many years, is politics. Don't worry. I said a joke to a new couple that came when they were asking, are you speaking next week? And I said, yeah, I'm just going to tell you who God's chosen candidate is. And I was joking. Thankfully, that's not what we're talking about. But it's still so polarizing, the idea of how do we engage as U.S. citizens, as well as what Paul is saying, that I can't really place my confidence in that, but I am a citizen of heaven. How do we unpack that? And to demonstrate how polarizing politics are, if it doesn't already turn your stomach, there is a sense where Gallup and Pew Research and a bunch of other groups, they do a research every year, and it kind of comes up with the same data. They do it about every September. The new one's just come out now. Last year's is basically come out saying that a little more than a year before the election, last September, 2/3 of Americans, 65%, say they always feel exhausted when thinking of politics. 55% feel angry. Less than 10% say they always or often feel hopeful about politics. Even fewer, less than 4%, are excited. That's not great. The new numbers are coming in saying 65% always or often feel exhausted. Positive views of governmental and political institutions are now at historic lows. As long as they've been tracking it, they are the lowest they have ever been in the United States. And the largest share of the public dislikes both parties ever, right now. The largest percentage is where we are. So we carry this angst into our dinner tables, into our churches, this unrest. I have a friend, good friend, John Huckins. He led Global Immersion for many years. He's now the leader of Journey Home. It's the organization I went on the Camino Santiago with, got to spend many days walking and kind of hour and being mentored by John. John lives at the front lines at the intersection of his citizenship to U.S. and the citizenship to the kingdom of heaven. In fact, my preference was that he would be with you this morning, that he would share this word, because I am channeling him. I'm doing my best John Huckins impersonation because he lives the life. He couldn't because he's at the Mexico border where he leads pilgrimages, where he is ministering to the immigrant community that's encamped there, and he's advocating for the return of families to be together that are separated by Border Patrol. He spends his extra other free time at the intersection of Gaza and Palestine and Israel. And so lives the life, walks the walk and talks the talk. And so what I'm doing this morning is channeling John. I had this long conversation with him about what it is to be a citizen of heaven and a citizen of empire of the U.S. What does that look like? And that angst that he feels, he does these workshops where he does word association. And he grabs the whole group like this, and he's working them through how to civically engage, but he gives words like Republican, Democrat, Donald Trump, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Super Tuesday, Congress. He just throws those out there, and he asks for feedback. How do you feel when you hear those words? And 100% of the time, he says 100% of those are negative. He has never, ever, ever once had someone respond with hope. Ever. As long as he's been doing it, he says it's always negative on all of that word association. I know you know this. I know you feel this, because so do I, what it is to be a citizen of empire. I'm also wanting to say that I am in no ways interested in a diatribe critiquing America. I didn't get U.S. citizenship until late teens, early 20s. I wasn't born here in America, but I had to advocate for myself to become a U.S. citizen and go through the process with INS and walk through the immigration process, albeit advantaged because I had naturalized U.S.-born parents who were born in the United States. I had resources. I had all of the things going for me to make that possible. It was still a major pain in the butt and went pretty wrongly for a lot of that, a lot of delays and a lot of challenges. So I'm not critiquing America, and I'm not critiquing parties. I want to critique paradigms. And paradigms are just the ways in which historically the church has had its interaction and association with power and empire, and the ways in which Christians have had our connection to power and empire. And what that does to our mental frame, what that does to our emotional state, and what that does to our witness in the kingdom. And what Paul is leaning us into imitating, what this letter to the Philippians is an invitation for us to lean into what it is to be Christ-like and to follow him and others walking this path, that is what I'm interested in talking about. So, when I became a U.S. citizen, I showed up to the INS building in L.A., and it was a football field-sized room of which there were thousands, it seemed like, of people of all different races waiting like at a butcher shop with a number that shows up. You get a window that shows your number, and you have to wait, but you probably are going to wait 3 to 5 hours because you have no idea when that number will be called. And it might not be called that day. And so I went up there to L.A. for the first day, number didn't get called. Went back again, and the number did get called, and you have this exhausted woman that is behind the counter on a microphone trying to say a name that she cannot pronounce. And the confusion of somebody else sitting there as she is butchering Middle Eastern names and butchering Spanish names. And there's somebody that's like, I think that's my name, but it's very off. And confused people walk up, often speaking no English, and then that interaction goes poorly, and it was a disaster zone. And then I finally go up to the counter where it's my turn, and the records that they had of who they thought was arriving was a 5-year-old boy. And birth date numbers, addresses, born to whom, and all that was wrong. The government data was dead wrong. And they said, well, we got to fix this. We'll let you know when we can find your records of where you were born, all that stuff. Well, that took, I think, almost 2 years before I got a call back. So you can come back. So I did, and I came back. By this time, it was the end of George Bush 1, beginning of George Bush 2, I think, actually. Yes. And I got through the process where I could put my hand up and do my pledge and oath of allegiance. Some of you may have done this if you got U.S. citizenship. I want to read you my oath that I gave, my pledge. This was only been modified, I think, in the 50s. It's been the pledge that's existed in the U.S. when you become citizen for the last 70-some years. It's only changed once, to my knowledge. This is still the way that it goes. The oath and pledge of allegiance that I took says this: I hereby declare on oath that I absolutely and entirely renounce and abjure all allegiance and fidelity to any foreign prince, potentate, state, or sovereignty of whom or which I have heretofore been a citizen or subject as citizen. That I will support and defend the Constitution and laws of the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That I will bear true faith and fidelity and allegiance to the same. That I will bear arms on behalf of the United States when required to. That I will perform non-combatant service in the armed forces of the United States when required to by law. That I will perform the work of national importance under the civilian direction when required to by law. And that I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, so help me God. That was my pledge. And talking to John, I had this conversation. What is a pledge? And what is allegiance? When I was growing up, I would go to homeroom in the various elementary schools, and I'm not sure if they still do it. Do your kids do the Pledge of Allegiance in elementary school? Still happens, right? Homeroom, you stand up, hand over the heart, Pledge of Allegiance happens. All right, that's what I thought. John has kids that he leads these workshops through, and he asks them, what's a pledge? And one of the kids said, it's when you give or willing to give everything to as a promise. The pledge is simply a promise. And allegiance is something you're willing to give everything to. That was from actually a child. I thought that's pretty astute for a kid to say that. I feel like they nailed it. I feel like the kids nailed it. He had this conversation because he showed up too late with his children to class. And he got there while they were doing the Pledge of Allegiance. And they had them stand up and heard him do it. And so he's unpacking this with his kids and with a bunch of other kids at his church. So what do I do then as a new citizen of the United States in my early 20s when the Pledge of Allegiance that I've just made and the oath that I've just put my hand on the Bible and raised my hand to say that I am pledging to give everything to, and a promise that I've made? What do I do when the values of the U.S. don't match the values of the kingdom? What do I do with that? Over history, I think it's been clear that empires that have come and gone are almost never mirroring the kingdom. They certainly don't mirror Jesus' economy. The values of the U.S., not entirely, but in many ways, are not promoting the last shall be first. They're not promoting consider others more important than yourself. They're not promoting self-sacrifice. They're not promoting the cumulative or corporate good versus the individualistic good. They're not promoting the values of Christ. And in fact, the people group that Jesus was associated with were almost universally those on the underside of power and the underside of empire. Jesus himself would have been on the underside of power in an occupied land over empire. His people group. And for centuries later, the Jewish people group found themselves consistently on the underside of power, not represented by empire. And their values did not match. Paul's values do not match with Rome's values. Clearly, they don't match. So I want to say that this is not a conversation that is apolitical, unfortunately. Meaning it's not something that we can remove politics from the frame because Jesus was intently political. And to say that politics are divisive is often for us to stay silent, meaning it's the first domino to fall when we say that we just don't talk about it. And the challenge is that the word politics comes from the word polis, and it simply means the ordering of society, how everything is ordered. And I think Jesus was intently focused on the kingdom of God, bringing an ordering of society that is upside down, that is different, that the economy was different than the values of Rome. Jesus was intently political. And in fact, so was the early church, so much so that others argue that the majority of those martyred for their faith was not for their religious reasons, but for political ones. The early church apostles, who virtually all died at the hands of empire, are dying because they're saying Jesus is king, not Caesar. Rome was full of religious liberty, was full of various religious expressions, was full of various ways of you to worship. So when we say we don't want to talk about politics and stay silent, and we say we just want to talk about Jesus, what I'm saying is I don't know what Jesus that is. I'm not quite sure what Jesus we're talking about then, because Jesus was intently political. He was about the ordering of society, starting with what's happening within the kingdom. On earth as it is in heaven, recognize that prayer. Whose kingdom come? Your kingdom come, Lord. Where? On earth as it is in heaven. This is how Jesus taught us to pray. So what blinded me for many years? The ring of power, to use Tolkien's language. I feel like I can hold it just for a little while. The connection of the church, myself, of Christianity, of its coziness to power, to empire, is blinding. And it's disrupted my ability to stay in the community and the kingdom of whom we read about in the biblical narrative. I can become so disconnected to the community that exists in the biblical narrative that I tend to read myself into the story as the protagonist. I tend to read the scriptures as if I have more in common with Moses than I do with Pharaoh, and I don't. It's as if I have more in common with the people on the underside of power, when the truth is that I am on the other side of it, historically speaking. That I can hold the ring just for a little while. I'll do good things with it. Trust me. So I want to talk about 3 paradigms. These aren't mine. I'm borrowing these with permission from John. And these paradigms exist in 2 unhelpful ways, historically the ways the church has expressed itself as citizen of the kingdom of heaven and of the empire, and 1 paradigm I think that might be helpful that we move towards, of what does it mean for you to be a citizen of heaven. And the first one I want to call cross and country. Cross and country is the oldest of them, of these paradigms, and it's to say that the mission of God is the same as the mission of the empire, that they're one and the same, that our victory is God's victory. That as the U.S. succeeds, so does God, and vice versa. And this really began with Constantine, 300 years into the early church, when Christianity became the religion of empire. Christians laid down their crosses and picked up their swords. Before that, the early church was an alternative society, truly alternative, that was built around love, self-sacrifice, the last shall be first, the elevation of the marginalized, children, women, poor. Their lives were radically changed as a result of the kingdom of heaven on earth through this alternate society was elevating those marginalized groups and those on the underside of power in very confusing ways to the onlooking community. Why do you put so much value in these women and slaves and children and poor people? They had an alternative society. And then empire hands that ring to Christianity of power. And we laid down our cross and picked up our swords and got crusades, bloody battles that we blessed, the Inquisition, manifest destiny, American exceptionalism, on and on and on and on it goes. At that point forward, the good of the empire was seen as the good of the kingdom. And it played out, still playing out. And the left and the right can put so much faith in whatever candidate that they're pushing forward. And and it ends up displacing our allegiance to Jesus. So much faith in whatever it is that we're saying that the empire needs to be, that it displaces our allegiance to a citizen of heaven and are mirroring and imitating what Jesus is like. And the result, where this has gotten us, is idolatrous Christian nationalism. The idolatry of empire and the conflation of God and country. I can personally really connect to this. Many years ago, I was a worship pastor at another church, and whenever 4th of July was on or near the accompanying Sunday, there's this really sweet, beautiful old lady, Helen, who I would show up early, and then I would be getting ready, but her primary motivation around that week was to take the big cross that sat beside and behind us of the sanctuary and wrap that in an American flag and then the Christian flag. And I'm a young man at this time speaking to an elderly woman whom I love dearly, who was really, really sweet, and didn't have the language to talk about the dissonance that I was feeling in that. I didn't really know how to have the conversation of like, wow, wait, in my heart was like, I don't like that. I didn't really know why. I didn't really understand why that struck the chord. And I wish I weren't allowing it. It wasn't totally up to me, but it happened. Happened about every year. And there's strong compulsion. Many churches still to this day may be singing on their 4th of July Sundays and near them, God bless America. And again, my words are not to say I don't want God to bless America. I want God to bless America. I'm a citizen of this nation. But there was something off in that is hard to put our thumb on, right? It's this mirroring of the last thousands of years of God and country, empire and Jesus, conflated together, wrapped together in one piece that feels off. I distinctly remember after 9/11, as we entered into Iraq in shock and awe in the retaliation campaign for what had happened, maybe even in my heart, cheering, kind of silently goading on or even publicly goading on our campaign of death and destruction that ensued. Wrapped up in American exceptionalism and wrapped up in bloodlust and vengeance for what had happened after that, feeling like something needs to be done. Man. At that point, I was a newly minted U.S. citizen. This was now my nation. In fact, just after that time, because the citizenship that I received post 9/11, because it was around that window of time, and they were concerned about the border crossings, the U.S. made me renounce dual. There was a window of time that became the Patriot Act that said, you're not actually allowed. If you're U.S. or nobody. And I had to renounce my other citizenship if I wanted the blue passport. And I did. I think that's no longer the policy. I think you can be dual, but that window of time forced that renouncing. So what happened to me? I think my connection to power, my consistently being on the inside, my inability to see those who are being bombed was because I've been part of the group that was holding the bomb. Always. I had not connected myself to those on the underside of power. I could cheer those because I was always the bombing group, not the bombed. My privilege and my power blinded me from seeing the citizen of heaven. And what do I mean by privilege? Privilege is just the ability to walk away from the plight of those on the underside of power. That's my privilege. My privilege is that I have the ability to walk away. I have the ability to walk away from those who are under the boot. Easily. I can walk right away from that. I have no connection to those. I have the ability to walk away from those under the boot of empire that are in Jesus' community, that are part of the historical people of God, part of the historical community of faith. I have the ability to walk away from that. I'm privileged in that way. My life goes on. I wasn't connected to the migrant workers in my city because I was too busy critiquing them for taking our jobs and our health care. I wasn't connected myself to the broken systems that I was participating in. I was not realizing how it was crushing people, how it shackled me to the partisan fidelity and toxic nationalism. I learned to leverage my privilege to benefit those on the top side of power, not the underside of power. And then it took time for the Holy Spirit to work in my life and in my heart to where then I started reading the scriptures and not reading myself as Moses, but as Pharaoh. That I have more in common with Pilate than I do Jesus. And that's true. I have more in common with Pilate than Jesus. So what did it mean for me to confront the text and ask, who are the people in the community of God that have historically been on the underside of the empire and of power? That's paradigm one, cross and country. One that I've thankfully moved on from. Paradigm two, I'm going to call this apolitical and isolated. And in fact, man, this one feels good. Historical examples would be the Essenes in the first century Roman Empire. Faithful Jewish community who escaped the society's norms and constructed an empire to hope that things would get better through fervent prayer. The desert mothers and fathers who have added so much to my spiritual life have been in this community, disconnected from the broken systems around them and separating themselves from society out into the deserts to form a life of contemplative prayer. It was beautiful. It's the radical reformers of the Protestant Reformation. It said that the Catholic churches did not get reformed. That failed. And so we will leave. We will be apolitical and isolate from that. And it's the people today that say we're going to live a prophetic alternative. And you hear that language a lot in these circles, that we exist as a prophetic alternative to the norms of the broken system. And I would say that on a theological level, I connect so much with the apolitical and isolated folks. They've added so much to my life spiritually in their writings. And I'd also argue that it's incredibly insular and privileged. Here's how. This is a story from John. He lives down in San Diego. He and his wife and their 4 kids are in a diverse set of communities, much like mine. I live on Algodon. I'm quite certain that there are several undocumented immigrants that live on my street. John said, when our neighbor was deported and separated from her 5 kids, and we met her on the streets of Tijuana as she called us, it's insufficient for me to say, we pray for you and hope you get reconnected with your family. Yes, I said, we're going to pray for you, and we're going to give our lives to dismantle the broken systems that are keeping you separated from your family. Thoughts and prayers are just not enough anymore, and the world's so sick of it. So sick of every tragedy having thoughts and prayers. Thoughts and prayers, thoughts and prayers. The onlooking non-Christian, not in the kingdom of heaven on earth, is so sick of your thoughts and prayers. I'm tired of it. It's the story of Nancy and I receiving Valerie and Daniela. This is a picture of Daniela. And then show the one of Valerie. That's Valerie. Tried to find ones where they were bonkers. Most of the time that they were with us, they were nuts. In the best way, but nuts. Nancy and I were in foster adopt classes to just be a part of the solution in the foster system. We were not yet through the certification. Our plans were that we were going to have a young child stay within the birth order, do all the things that you're supposed to do, stay in the right order and get one child and not disrupt so much of our own family dynamic. And we still had some classes to go. We weren't yet really approved to receive children. And in class, one of the caseworkers comes up to Nancy, taps us on the shoulders. Hey, can we talk to you? She comes and grabs us and says, there's these 2 babies. Orangewood and our orphan care process is not set up to end up taking infants. We don't have any families that are scheduled to take these 2 sisters that are at the time was like 5 months and a year and a half old-ish. They need a home tonight, basically. We have nowhere that they can go. Whoa. So we said, can you give me a minute? There was nowhere to have privacy other than our car. And all we had was a picture of Valerie, this little picture of this beautiful little girl. And I don't even remember what we prayed. We prayed. I don't remember it. Nancy might. But I do remember thinking, I can't go back to Valerie and to Daniela, to their mother, to the caseworker, and say, I can't actually do that, but I'll pray for you. Now, I'm not saying that would have been wrong for me to ask the God's counsel and be wise and step in wisdom to know what I can do. But definitely in that moment, I felt the pinch of thoughts and prayers are not enough here. These babies need a home. And we took them in. And it was the hardest few years of our whole lives. So hard. And hard and beautiful. It was really hard. And if I was under the paradigm of apolitical and isolated and said, let me just go back to my insular society and my life of contemplation, and I will live as a prophetic alternative and not participate in those broken systems, do nothing to help and aid them, and just pray about it, then I would have, in hindsight, really, really regretted it. We loved these girls. They're daughters to us. We advocated for their reunification with their biological mom. They did. It came at a cost of Nancy and I having to go against empire and the system, against the initial threats of saying that we want to take these kids from their mother, and if you say that you'll adopt them, we'll terminate her rights. And if you don't, then we're going to move them from your house. And we said, we're going to do neither of those. Played a game of chicken with the state of California, and we won. We said neither. We're going to advocate for their mother and get her whole and healthy and get these kids back to their mom. And they did. It's not enough thoughts and prayers in that situation. And I, like Paul, as he starts in all of this, when he says, I'm not saying I have all this together, that I have it made, that I'm well on my way, reaching out for Christ, who so wonderfully reached for me. I don't have this all together. I'm not saying do as I do, that I've figured this out. But there has to be a way to identify these paradigms, to look to others and try to find this middle ground of what it is to be a citizen of heaven. I think it's easy for us, for me, I won't speak for you, for me, easy, bloated on power and privilege, an insider mentality, or in academia where I can just think my way out of problems, out of these things. That's really easy for me to do. But I've just not been invited in this letter to the Philippians by Paul as he sung the song to the Philippians saying this is how we're going to imitate Jesus as he humbled himself, emptied himself, becoming a servant, even a slave, dying a death on a cross so that he's raised up, name above all names. We're invited to imitate that. Now Paul is inviting us to imitate the early church as he's saying, watch me, watch others as we do this. What is he inviting you to imitate? What is he inviting you into? Not to an apolitical, insular, and isolated society. So the third paradigm is what we call conflicted allegiance. And this is the one I hope that I can move towards, that we can move towards. What does it mean? I would argue it's to embrace a conflicted allegiance where on one hand, and these are John's words, I'm channeling John again, argue it's to embrace a conflicted allegiance where in one hand we always prioritize our allegiance to the kingdom of God and we hold in tension and leverage our influence as a U.S. citizen. The blue passport actually has power. If we don't name it, then we're living in a cave. We're living in an insular reality from those that are experiencing the most pain from our broken systems. It's John Huckins. This is Matthew 22, as Jesus says, give to Caesar what is Caesar's. Jesus is saying their economy is not the economy of the kingdom. It's a different economy altogether. A conflicted allegiance is Joanna. Beautiful story of one of the women who funded Jesus' ministry. These women were actually the ones that have means, wealthy, citizens of empire, and not just on the inside, but very much on the inside. Joanna was paid by Herod himself. Her husband was Herod's assistant. She's holding in conflicted tension in her allegiance to empire as working for the empire, while all the while funding the kingdom of heaven and the revolution that's happening. Conflicted allegiance was Joanna. It's in Acts 17. Paul and his friends are sharing the good news in synagogues. And the synagogues at the time, unfortunately, very much so aligned with empire. We know that because we see in John 18 and 19, Jesus speaking to Pilate when he says, Jesus speaking, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting. I might not be delivered over to the Jews, but my kingdom is not from the world." So Pilate's still in conversation here. Turns to the Pharisees. "Should I crucify your king?" And what did the chief priests reply? "We have no king except Caesar." No conflicted allegiance there. They're all in on Caesar. Not this Jesus fella. Paul turning that on its head in his life and his ministry, saying that Caesar isn't king as he goes into those same synagogues with those same chief priests and those same leaders who are around, walking into the same ones that said our allegiance is Caesar, not Jesus, turns it on its head and starts preaching about this new kingdom, citizen of heaven, under the kingship of Jesus. And what happens is the story where they get so upset that they drag them out of the synagogue, and the words that they say, again, decades after Jesus has risen, these Christians are disturbing the peace of whom? What peace are they disturbing? Of the empire, they say. These Christians, they're disturbing the peace of the empire. I think what it means when you have conflicted allegiance is that you disrupt the status quo. That it often means disturbing the peace of the empire. It just does. Thoughtfully, prayerfully, nonviolently, peacefully disturbing the status quo. So what do we do? What do we do with this? Start with detoxing ourselves from power and safety and comfort and money and say that Jesus is king. We're like addicts. I'm like an addict, needing to detox from these things. Detox from my connection to power and money and influence. Recognize that Jesus is king and that I am a citizen of his kingdom. Actually mean it when I pray on earth as it is in heaven. What does it mean to have your kingdom come now, here, in this space? And that Jesus is whom I'm imitating, not the empire. I love at the end of that skirmish in Acts with Paul being dragged out because of the disturbing of the peace of the empire. A fellow with them named Jason. They drag Jason out. And their biggest dig on Jason is they say, Jason has welcomed them into his home. Every one of them does what is contrary to Caesar's decrees. And they're naming someone else as king, comma, Jesus. That was the dig. And I imagine Jason standing there being like, yep, guilty as charged. Guilty as charged. We see that this is not a new paradigm. Conflicted allegiance is what it means to live inside empire, to be part of the U.S. and part of the kingdom of heaven. I think so many of us feel like we have to stay so faithful to partisan lines, Republican, Democrat, progressive, liberal, whatever, conservative. Pick your label. We need to release that. I need to release that and say, how are we staying faithful to the kingdom of heaven, to your citizenship? A conflicted allegiance is not saying to Valerie and Daniela that I'll just pray for you. A conflicted allegiance is not saying to the family separated from their families at the border crossing that we will simply pray for you. A conflicted allegiance is asking ourselves in what way God is inviting you to imitate Jesus, which disrupts the status quo, dismantles broken systems, and becomes his kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. A conflicted allegiance is placing no confidence in flesh, in race, in religion, in education, and in nationality. That is not where my confidence lies. It's living a life as if we truly believe that sacrificial love, laying down my life, is the way to gain it. That was so hard a truth that none of the apostles got it while Jesus was with them. None of them actually understood that truth. It was too deep, too difficult. Lay down my life, weakness, there's power in weakness. Humility is a way forward. The path of ascent is the path of descent. It was too deep a truth for them, even while they were with him, to fully grasp that. Clearly they didn't, as Peter slices off an ear of a soldier, and as Jesus tells his disciples that I'm going to be crucified, they say, nah, it's not going to happen on my watch. They were against the idea of weakness. A conflicted allegiance are the white pastors, of which there were far too few, arm in arm with MLK, walking across the bridge or going to prison in Birmingham. If you haven't read MLK's letter from Birmingham's prison, it's a long letter. In fact, he even says in the letter how much he is apologizing. The letter is to so many of the white pastors who were saying, hey man, we're with you, but you're making kind of a big deal about all of this. Just be patient. Be patient. Things happen slowly. I get that you're anxious for civil rights in the South, but it's just going to take time, Martin Luther. Just be patient. He's writing a letter to them. It's a long letter because he says, I have nothing else to do in jail. Read it. You can Google it. Read his letter to those pastors of what that was like to disrupt the status quo. That's a conflicted allegiance. That's the kind of thing that we're invited into. And we have to take that call with this sober and heaviness because it's not easy. Man, that feels like a big call. So I'll close with this. How do we do it? We imitate Jesus. That seems like the best place to start. And we look to others who are doing this. Shoot, Pug's funeral had like 1,500 people there. Why? Because of the testimony of others looking to him as he looks to Jesus. And that legacy carried forward into his life. It was a big deal. Be generous without compromising our core convictions. This also should be easy. It's possible to stay faithful to Jesus and not be a jerk. That is possible. Just going to name that and say it. You can be a faithful follower of Jesus and not be a jerk. I'd start there. Be generous with people who think differently, who act differently. Don't be a jerk. Invite others to join us. Proximity matters. Closeness to those who are on the underside of power matters. It just does. Closeness to those on the underside of power is inviting the Spirit to transform you. In fact, throughout the gospel and in Mark, when he's saying that the poor that came into their assembly, they're not coming in because God is here. At Branches, the addicts that are in rehab homes that come, the homeless that might find their way in, those who are down and out, when they come in, they don't come in here because I'm dispensing doses of God out to them and this is the epicenter of godliness. Actually, it's on its head. Mark talks about they bring the presence of Jesus into the assembly. They are those who bring Christ into your presence. They are the ones in proximity to Jesus. Proximity matters. Close the gap between us and them, whomever that is. Close the gap in your life. And then lastly, be willing to be misunderstood. Band, you can come on up as I close this. Be willing to be misunderstood. Your proximity to those that think differently than you, there will be those that will accuse you of a full-throated endorsement of whomever that you are with. So be it. Be prepared to be misunderstood. Be prepared to follow Jesus and draw near to somebody that somebody else doesn't like. And be prepared to be categorized the same as them, to be put in that category, and be okay with it. Just resolve that you're going to be misunderstood. Forget the labels that others will use due to misunderstanding. If that's a primary detractor of being a citizen of heaven because your proximity to those who think differently, you might be afraid that others would think that you're just like them, I would say, get over yourself. We're just not that important. And be willing to be misunderstood for the sake of Jesus. This letter is chock full of invitations chock full of invitations to imitate Jesus and then to imitate Paul. And what Paul's asking for us is he's using the language of running a race, follow him as they follow others, stay on this path, stay with me, it's hard. This is what he's inviting you into. This is the invitation of Christ-likeness. And we're going to need each other to rally each other on, to say, good job, well done, I see you. Help me. What am I not seeing? What can we be doing as a community? As we move into November and talk about how we're expressing kingdom come and will be done on earth as it is in heaven in the community of San Clemente and San Juan and the ministry partners we have in Mexico, this is what we're going to be talking about. Join us. Join us as we imitate Jesus in this. It matters. Let's pray. Father, I have such a heavy heart for this conflicted allegiance of what it means for me to cherish this nation that I live, that I pursue, that I am a part of, but to place no confidence in this nation as being the source of my ultimate peace, or comfort, or salvation, or well-being. Forgive me, Lord, for the ways that I cozy up with power and influence and privilege. Help me to take the ring of power off. I can't hold it. Connect me with those that are on the underside of power and of empire so that you can show me who you are. Help me to learn from them and to bring them your love and peace and comfort. Help me to pray and then move beyond my prayers to action into something that's meaningfully helping those on the underside of power. In the name of Jesus, amen.